Hello, I'm Ed Zebrowski. Welcome to the fourth talk in our series, Before Spirit Was Spiritualistic, Philosophical Materialism from Genesis to Jesus. We'll be talking about the view of heaven that's prevalent throughout ancient Israelite literature. Today, people usually think of heaven as a spiritual realm, a plane of existence beyond the physical universe. But as we'll see, the texts we'll be considering present heaven as a palpable paradise. That is a tangible, physical, and glorious place. But before we get into it, let's briefly recap the previous talks of the series. Our main goal for these next few slides is to remind ourselves what we've learned about the materialist school in ancient Israel. First, though, I should mention, in the first talk of the series, Trent introduced the key ideas and terms and went through a brief history of Christian materialism. Be sure to keep in mind what materialism is. It is the idea that all existence is material. In other words, everything has body, location, structure, parts, divisibility, and everything is subject to motion, which means everything is subject to change and time. Immaterialism, on the other hand, is the idea that there are at least some aspects of reality that escape these physical attributes. It is the idea that there is such a thing as beyond the bounds of time and space. So, with that in mind, we've been going through writings from ancient Israel and finding that there was a school of thought in ancient Israel that was materialistic. They didn't believe in anything non-physical. They instead viewed everything as material, even the things that most people think of as immaterial. Another point to keep in mind is that the collections of writings today that bear the name the Bible are really relatively modern collections. So we've been investigating writings from ancient Israel, whether they were later included in the Bible or not. And it turns out that while not all ancient Israelites were materialists, the views that predominate in the biblical texts and in many texts outside of modern Bibles are materialistic views. And what were those views? Well, in Melissa's presentation, she showed that the materialist school in ancient Israel view human nature as purely material. There are a few aspects to this. First, they believed that our actual composition as humans is of just one type of stuff, dirt. They didn't think we have a non-physical part of us at all. Next, the way they explained mind and cognition was of being the activity of certain bodily organs. In the ancient world, there were people who believed that our thoughts were independent of our bodies, and they had no problem expressing this in their writings. But ancient Israelite materialists took a different view, the materialistic view. Lastly, Melissa showed that their view of death was also materialistic. They didn't think it was a separation of an immaterial soul from the body, because again, they didn't think we have immaterial souls. Instead, they regarded death as the end of the whole person. The person is organized dirt that breathes and moves. When the person stops breathing, they die, and the dirt that they are returns to the ground. Next, in our last presentation, Mary went through texts from ancient Israel that have an entirely materialistic view of the ultimate future. In fact, when you look at the major hopes for the future expressed in the most influential Israelite writings, they are all materialistic hopes. The most ultimate of these hopes was the restoration of an Eden-like paradise. Mary also showed that for Jesus and his early followers, bodily resurrection was a central doctrine. They didn't think we would live forever as disembodied spirits. They did believe we will live forever as perfected and gloriously intelligent bodies. For people who believe in immaterial souls, bodily resurrection is superfluous, not central. An immaterial, immortal soul would live forever anyway, with or without a body. But for Jesus and the early Christians, bodily resurrection was absolutely central. Which brings us to her last point. The early Jesus movement regarded bodily resurrection as the only hope for future existence. This couldn't be the case if they thought it was possible to have a non-bodily existence. In this presentation, we're going to cover two main points. The prevalent view found in ancient Israelite literature of heaven and the inhabitants of heaven. But first, let's take a moment to make sure we're taking the right approach to the information we'll be considering. It's important to make sure we have an attitude that's open to considering new ideas, even if those ideas conflict with our current understanding. I'm sure we can all agree that we should care about evidence and truth, but we also all have tendencies to ignore or set aside evidence that goes against our current understanding. We don't like being wrong. However, being wrong and admitting it is the cornerstone to advancement. It's an essential aspect of science. A scientist sets out to put their hypothesis to the test. If the hypothesis stands, then great. However, if the hypothesis falls, also great, because the scientist is now closer to the truth. So, we need to be willing to learn and unlearn. We need to self-examine for biases, and we need to conscientiously consider evidence. Okay, we're now ready to get started. In order to get into this, let's go into a short journey together using some pictures taken out of nature in Israel that show us the world pretty much as the ancient Israelites knew it. Imagine with me that you're an ancient Israelite in, say, the year 800 BCE. You don't have any of the modern knowledge of cosmology. This is before people knew that the Earth revolves around the sun, and even before they knew the Earth is spherical. So here you are, and all you know is that you're standing on what seems like a relatively flat surface, the Earth. So far as you can tell, it doesn't move. The world to you has two main divisions, the Earth and the sky. The Earth is flat and stationary, while the sky looks like a giant dome. The sky doesn't look like a flat disk floating overhead the same distance from all the Earth at every point. No, it looks like it's curved, like a dome with its edges resting on the Earth somewhere far away. So, what is the Earth made of? You know, you're on it all the time. You're even made of it. It's dirt. And the sky? Well, that's obvious too. Just like there is water here below, it sure looks like there is water above as well. So this is your world. Every day, the sun ascends from somewhere in the east. It then crosses over the surface of the sky dome, and then descends to its place in the west. The moon and stars, well, they do the same thing at night. Okay, today we have knowledge of a vast universe beyond our own world. But to the ancient Israelites, the world they saw was all they knew. And this wasn't just the ancient Israelites. People from other nations had a very similar understanding of the structure of the world, at least in terms of the Earth being flat and stationary, while the sky is a giant dome. And this is the view present throughout their writings. Consider this familiar passage. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Notice here there are two main divisions of the world, the earth and, the heavens. This is why it's important for us to cover this. When we read the word heavens, we might think of an immaterialistic idea of heaven. That is, a spiritual or non-physical realm. But this isn't what the word here means. It simply means the skies. The Hebrew word is shamayim, and this chapter makes really plain what this refers to. Here's Genesis 1, 6 through 8. And God said, "Let there be a vaulted dome in the midst of the waters, and let it cause a separation between the waters." So God made the vaulted dome, and he caused a separation between the waters which were under the vaulted dome, and between the waters which were over the vaulted dome. And it was so. And God called the vaulted dome heaven. So the heaven, the shamayim, is this vaulted dome. The word translated vaulted dome here is rakia. This word rakia is often translated as dome or vault or vaulted dome in modern translations, but it's also translated as expanse and firmament. What the word really means is something like beaten sheet. As one example to illustrate this, let's read a verse that uses a verb based on the same root. And Eleazar the priest took the censers of bronze that the burned ones presented, and he beat them as plating for the altar. That's Numbers 16:39. So again, the word beat here is from the same root as rakia. As a verb, it means to beat, and as a noun, it refers to something that has been beaten. So according to Genesis 1, the heaven, or the sky, is the beaten dome. And note also the function of the sky. The sky divides the waters above it from the waters below it. We won't take the time to quote more passages about ancient Israelite cosmology, but here are some more references that fill out the picture. There's a lot more that could be added to this, but it gives the big picture. The earth is said to be immovable and to have foundations and pillars on which it rests. The skies are also said to have foundations and pillars. They are described as being made of a solid, beaten material. They have windows, there is water above them, and there are even texts that describe there being multiple skies, that is, multiple domes. The idea is that between the various domes were vast regions, each containing different things, and then in the highest region was God's dwelling place. Importantly, the so-called heavens here are not a spiritual realm or a plane of existence beyond time and space. Instead, the heavens are an essential part of the material cosmos. So we'll now turn to what these texts have to say about what is up there in the heavens, and not just the visible sky dome and the sun, moon, and stars. What did the Israelites think resided in the regions beyond that? Let's start with paradise. The word paradise is actually a Persian word that originally referred to walled gardens, but soon to gardens in general, often orchards and beautiful parks. In the second half of the 6th century BCE, Persians defeated the Babylonians and became the dominant empire of the Near East. The Jews at that time came under Persian rule and naturally incorporated some Persian words into their vocabulary, including this one, paradise. Later, when Hebrew writings were being translated into Greek for the first time, the word paradise was used to translate the word meaning garden in Genesis 2 through 3. As we'll see, this connection became important in how the word started to be used. Let's start with something Paul had to say. I know a man in Christ who was caught up into the third heaven 14 years ago. He was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which is not lawful for a man to utter. This is 2 Corinthians 12, 2 and 4. So here, Paul is saying that there is a place in the third heaven called paradise. As we've just learned, the third heaven in ancient Israelite cosmology was a physical place above earth. It's 3 domes up, and there is where paradise is, according to Paul. Next, we have a mention of paradise in Revelation. In the context, this is Jesus speaking to John, telling him what to write to the 7 churches in Asia Minor. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. To him who overcomes, I will give to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of my God. And this is Revelation 2:7. So here, paradise has in it the tree of life. This is keeping true to the idea of paradise, not as a non-physical realm, but as a garden, a material botanical utopia. And later in Revelation, we learn more about this paradise. He showed me a river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb, in the middle of its street. On this side of the river and on that was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruits, yielding its fruit every month. Blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life, and may enter by the gates into the city. And that's Revelation 22, 1 through 2 and 14. So here, the place where the tree of life is, which we just read is paradise, has a river in it, and the tree bears different kinds of fruit each month. And it says that this is within a city. A description of this city was given in the previous chapter of Revelation. I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. I heard a loud voice out of heaven saying, Behold, God's dwelling is with people, having a great and high wall with 12 gates. The wall of the city had 12 foundations. He who spoke with me had for a measure a golden reed to measure the city, its gates, and its walls. The city is square. Its length is as great as its width. He measured the city with the reed, 12,012 stadia. Its length, width, and height are equal. Its wall is 144 cubits by the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. The construction of its wall was jasper. The city was pure gold, like pure glass. The foundations of the city's wall were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. And that's Revelation 21, 16 through 19. And that description goes on. So notice this city, in which is paradise, is clearly a material city. It has body, location, structure, parts, and is made of various building materials. It has time since the river flows and the tree bears different fruit at different times. It is described as a city that will be on earth in which the purely corporeal resurrected saints will be able to enter. And this totally palpable paradise is said to come to earth from heaven. And when John sees this happen, he hears it said, God's dwelling is with people. In other words, before coming to earth, it is up in the sky, beyond the domes, up into the third sky dome, according to Paul. And that is where God lives. So while today we think of the realm of God and the angels as being of an entirely different nature from our own tangible existence, people in the early Jesus movement understood it to be fundamentally the same realm, a purely material realm. A whole city, and a huge one at that, can be at one time on earth and at another time up in the third heaven. And yet it is the same city made of the same substance the whole time. And this brings us to another point. Another piece of evidence that the early followers of Jesus had a materialist view of paradise is that they believed that Jesus ascended there bodily and will return from there bodily. Consider this from Acts 1. Jesus had just spoken to his disciples, and then it says, when he had said these things, as they were looking, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. While they were looking steadfastly into the sky as he went, behold, two men stood by them in white clothing, who also said, You men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into the sky? This Jesus who was received up from you into the sky will come back in the same way as you saw him going into the sky. Again, that's Acts 1, 9 through 11. Notice it says this Jesus. That is, the same Jesus will come back in the same way. There is no hint of Jesus dematerializing or anything like that. And in fact, there is much more plain evidence that the early Christians believed Jesus was corporeal even while in heaven. But I'll leave that for Teresa in our next talk. But it is noteworthy that they understood heaven, the sky, and even the place where God is to be a material place to which human beings could physically travel. And of course, this idea goes back earlier within Israelite thinking. Remember Elijah, for example, who was understood to be taken to heaven bodily? You can read that in 1 Kings 2. And another who was believed to be taken to heaven was Enoch. In Genesis 5, it implies that God took him, but other writings like 1st Enoch give a much fuller view. 1st Enoch is a complicated book, or rather, a compilation of books that describes visions of Enoch and his eventual bodily ascension to paradise. Throughout, it describes the heavens in bodily terms. For example, consider this. The winds were causing me to fly and rushing me high up into heaven, and I kept coming into heaven until I approached a wall which was built of white marble and surrounded by tongues of fire. And I came into the tongues of the fire and drew near to a great house which was built of white marble. And the inner walks were like mosaics of white marble, the floor of crystal. And behold, there was an opening before me, and a second house, which is greater than the former, and everything was built with tongues of fire. That's 1 Enoch 14, 8 through 10 and 15. So here, Enoch is taken to heaven in vision, and what he sees is a corporeal place with walls and floors and what seem to be hallways and mosaics. This is just one of many passages describing buildings in heaven. Consider these passages which refer to God as a builder of rooms in heaven. Psalm 104:3 calls him the one who sets logs in the water for his upper rooms, and Amos 9:6 calls him the builder in the skies of his upper rooms. And of course, we're probably all familiar with Jesus' statement, "In my Father's house are many homes. If it weren't so, I would have told you. I am going to prepare a place for you." Throughout the Gospel of John, it's plain that the place to which Jesus is going is heaven. And here, the place where he is going is his Father's house. Again, obviously in heaven. Early followers of Jesus also wrote specifically about a temple in heaven. This is from Revelation 11, and then the next slide will be from Revelation 14 and 15. God's temple that is in heaven was opened, and the ark of the Lord's covenant was seen in his temple. Lightnings, sounds, thunders, and earthquake, and great hail followed. Another angel came out of the temple. Another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven. After these things I looked, and the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened. These are just plain expressions of the view that there is a temple in heaven. Notice the temple is also called the tabernacle. The letters of the Hebrews also uses the same language. Now, in the things which we are saying, the main point is this. We have such a high priest, who sat down on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a servant of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched, not man. And that's Hebrews 8, 1 through 2. Now, we've been mostly focused on the descriptions of body and place in the heavens, but we also took note of the fact that time is part of paradise, given that the tree of life brings forth different fruit each month. And remember, time is the sequential relationship of change. And change is simply physical motion. In other words, time is indicative of material existence. As we've been seeing, the view of heaven presented in the writings of the ancient Israelite materialists is not that it is outside of time and space, but rather that it is within time and space. And there are some passages that speak very specifically of time in heaven. Revelation 8, for example, says, "When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour." A specific duration of time in heaven entails there being time in heaven. Earlier in Revelation, we find this. "After these things, I looked and saw a door opened in heaven, and the first voice that I heard, like a trumpet speaking with me, was one saying, 'Come up here.' Behold, there was a throne set in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. Around the throne were 4 living creatures. The 4 living creatures, each one of them having 6 wings, are full of eyes around and within. They have no rest day and night, saying, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the Almighty, who was and who is to come.'" And that's Revelation 4, 1 through 2, 6 and 8. Clearly, this is a scene in heaven, taking us into the very throne room of God. Significantly, it says that these four living creatures have no rest day and night as they say praises to God. So evidently there is day and night in heaven. But even beyond that, what they say about God includes the idea that he was, and he is, and he is to come. Far from presenting God as beyond time, this portrays God experiencing time successively. It doesn't say he is in the past and he is in the present and he is in the future, as though past, present, and future are all coexistent for him. It simply says that he was, and he is to come. Interestingly, there were people who promoted that God is beyond time in the ancient world. Let's look at what one of them had to say about expressions like what we find here in Revelation. Yes, we're back to Plato, but this time we're not looking at Socrates as presented by Plato. This is from Plato's Timaeus. Days and nights are all parts of time, and the past and future are created species of time, which we unconsciously but wrongly transfer to the eternal essence. For we say that he was, he is, he will be. But the truth is that is alone is properly attributed to him, and that was and will be are only to be spoken of becoming in time, for they are motions. But that which is immovably the same cannot become older or younger by time, nor ever did or has become or hereafter will be older or younger, nor is subject at all to any of the states which affect moving and sensible things, and of which generation is the cause. So here we have Plato specifically objecting to using expressions like was, is, and will be in reference to the eternal essence, or God, since that attributes time to God. Plato thought God is outside of time, so he didn't use such expressions other than to reject them. John the Revelator, on the other hand, did use such expressions about God, and others did as well. For example, Daniel calls God the Ancient of Days. To the ancient materialist school in ancient Israel, nothing escapes time, just like nothing escapes location and extension. All right, let's go to our next section. The inhabitants of heaven. You may have noticed that some of the texts we've been reading speak of various beings in heaven. Given the materialistic view of heaven itself, it should come as no surprise that they have a materialistic view of those who live there. Let's start with the passage we just looked at, Revelation 4. Behold, there was a throne set in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. Around the throne were 24 thrones. On the thrones were 24 elders sitting, dressed in white garments, with crowns of gold on their heads. And around the throne were four living creatures full of eyes before and behind. The first creature was like a lion, the second creature like a calf, the third creature had a face like a man, and the fourth was like a flying eagle. The four living creatures, each one of them having 6 wings, are full of eyes around and within. So first, there are these 24 elders. And are they bodiless spirits? No, they are corporeal beings. They are bodies with parts. It says they were dressed in garments, which is equivalent to saying they had their bodies covered with fabric of some sort. It also says they had crowns on their heads. This really leaves nothing needing to be inferred. This is just a straightforward description of corporeal beings in heaven. The next set of beings it describes is obviously more strange, but no less corporeal. In fact, the very thing that seems strange about them is their bodies. It says they are full of eyes, and each has 6 wings, and each one is similar to a different earthly animal. Again, these are said to be living creatures, and the description shows that this is meant literally. They are basically heavenly, intelligent animals. I say intelligent since they speak in the part quoted earlier. So here we have a text written by someone in the early Jesus movement expressing materialistic views of the beings in heaven. But as you might expect by now, the ideas here are building on ideas found in the writings of earlier Israelite materialists. This passage is a good example of that, since the living creatures are described in a way that's very similar to beings referred to in Isaiah and Ezekiel. We'll look at the passage in Isaiah first, but before we go there, another thing to take note of is that this is a heavenly throne room scene. As you'll see, that is also the case for some of the other passages we'll be looking at. This is Isaiah 6. In the year of the death of Uzziah the king, I saw the Lord sitting on a high and raised throne, and the hem of his robe was filling the temple. Seraphs were standing above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And the one called to the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, and in his hand was a hot coal he had taken from the altar with tongs. So here we have another throne room scene with 6 winged beings saying that God is holy. They are called seraphs, which means burning ones. And once again, they are corporeal. They have wings, faces, feet, and hands. And this is a verse from Ezekiel 1. I looked, and behold, a stormy wind came out of the north. Out of its center came the likeness of 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Everyone had 4 faces, and each one of them had 4 wings. Their feet were straight feet. The sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. They had the hands of a man under their wings on their 4 sides. As for the likeness of their faces, they had a face of a man. The 4 of them had a face of a lion on the right side. The 4 of them had a face of an ox on the left side. The 4 of them also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. So this is quite a detailed description of the bodies of these 4 living creatures. And again, the main point here is that these beings aren't described as bodiless. On the contrary, they're described as corporeal. And even though it isn't obvious from these verses we read, if you read the whole chapter, it's clear that this is another throne scene. This time it's not so much a throne room scene since it's a traveling throne, but still, it's the same sort of idea as we read in Isaiah 6 and Revelation 4. Okay, so let's now go to yet another throne room scene. This is from 1 Kings 22, and the context is that the prophet Micaiah is reporting what he saw to the king. As we read it, try to picture the scene. I saw Yahweh, a resider on his throne, and all the host of the skies standing about him at his right and at his left. And Yahweh said, Who will entice Ahab, so he will go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And this one said, Like so, and that one was saying, Like so. Then this gust proceeded and stood before the face of Yahweh, and he said, I'll persuade him. And Yahweh said to him, With what? And he said, I'll proceed and do my thing as a gust of falsehood with the mouths of all his prophets. And he said, You will persuade and you will even succeed. Proceed and basically work. So this is clearly a physical scene. Remember, Micaiah is reporting what he saw. So all the beings mentioned here were evidently visible. They each had their own location. The host of the skies is clearly a host of beings, and they are all gathered around Yahweh and interact with each other in this heavenly council in Yahweh's throne room. After some discussion, a gust comes forward to make a proposal, which is then accepted, and he then proceeds from the throne room to do his thing on earth. The word translated here as gust is ruach. It's rendered as spirit in most translations. But either way, this gust or spirit is described as being with a distinct location, operating from moment to moment in dialogue with other beings. In other words, he is spatial and temporal. Later in this series, we'll explain why gust more accurately conveys the meaning of ruach than spirit does. Now let's give attention for a moment to the host of the skies. This idea is really important in ancient Israelite thinking, since one of the most common titles for Yahweh is Yahweh of hosts, or as some translations have it, the Lord of hosts. But you know how it is. Sometimes a phrase is used so often it becomes cliche, and people don't really think about what it means. Well, from this passage, it's obvious that it's a host of beings. From the fact that the expression Yahweh of hosts is used so much in ancient Israel writings, we can know that they didn't think of Yahweh as a being alone. Instead, they believed he had a whole host of beings with him, like we see in this passage. And there are plenty of other texts that say more about Yahweh's hosts. Consider this from Psalm 103. Yahweh has established his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom rules over all. Bless Yahweh, you his angels, you mighty heroes who do his word by obeying the sound of his word. Bless Yahweh, you his hosts, you his attendants who do his will. One of the main features of Hebrew poetry is to repeat the same basic idea in different words. Here, Yahweh's angels are his hosts, or at a minimum, there's an overlap between them. But what are angels anyway? Are they disembodied spirits of the deceased? Or maybe independent, incorporeal creations of God? The answer in ancient Israelite texts is clear. To them, angels were not spirits of the deceased, nor were they incorporeal. They were beings from the sky who were understood to be just as corporeal as beings from the earth. Should also point out that the word angel itself isn't a label for a species or anything like that. It actually just means messenger. But it's used often with reference to heavenly messengers. So you can see that that's the idea in this passage. The angels obey Yahweh's word and do his will. It's pretty much like what we just read in 1 Kings 22. The angels gather around the throne of Yahweh in meetings to decide what to do and how to do it. When a decision has been reached, Yahweh sends the angels forth to do his will. And often this includes bearing a message of some sort. So they are called messengers, angels. And throughout Israelite literature, it's clear these messengers were understood to be material beings. We'll just look at a few passages to illustrate this, but be aware there's a lot more. This is an account of Yahweh appearing to Abraham in Genesis 18 and 19. Yahweh appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre as he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked and saw that 3 men stood near him. When he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself to the earth and said, "My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please don't go away from your servant. Now let a little water be fetched, wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. I will get a piece of bread so you can refresh your heart. After that you may go your way, now that you have come to your servant." They said, "Very well, do as you have said." This passage is fascinating for a number of reasons, but the most obvious reason for our present subject is that these 3 men are clearly corporeal, having bodies with feet and digestive systems and hearts that can be refreshed by food. The word translated as men here doesn't necessarily mean humans, nor does it necessarily mean males, but it certainly does mean persons. That is, intelligent, human-like beings. Later in the story, 2 of these men are identified as angels who go on again to Sodom, while the third is called Yahweh. He stays behind to talk to Abraham. And that's exactly what we read here. The men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before Yahweh. The 2 angels came to Sodom at evening. Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. Lot saw them and rose up to meet them. He bowed himself with his face to the earth, and he said, "See now, my lords, please come into your servant's house. Stay all night. Wash your feet, and you can rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, but we will stay in the street all night." He urged them greatly, and they came in with him and entered into his house. He made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Again, these angels are visible and corporeal. This text says they have feet and they ate. And eating evidently wasn't an act angels put on just for special occasions. Consider what this text says. It's describing what Yahweh did for Israel after he brought them from Egypt into the wilderness. Yet he commanded the skies above and opened the doors of heaven. He rained down manna on them to eat, and he gave them food from the sky. Man ate the bread of angels. He sent them food to the full. That's Psalm 78, 23 through 25. So according to this, there is food that is natural to the sky. It's the bread of angels. In other words, it's the food that they normally eat. The digestion of food is such an incontrovertibly bodily process that the fact that it was applied to angels should really settle the point that these writings viewed these heavenly beings as physical. There's just one more passage we'll read about angels, and it deals with another very bodily aspect of their nature. This is from 1 Enoch. And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And they were in all 200 who took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them, and they became pregnant. So obviously, according to this text, these heavenly angels were fully functional sexual beings, and this understands their nature to be similar enough to humans that reproduction is possible. What happens next makes clear that the results were disastrous since their offspring were bloodthirsty giants. But the point is that they are here understood to be starkly material beings. There's actually a ton within ancient Israelite writings about angels. This slide just gives a small sample of what's there. But what we find about angels in these texts is that their form is generally human-like. They travel from point A to point B. Despite their hiddenness, they are naturally visible. They eat food, wear clothing, have biological sex. They have faces, hands, legs, feet, etc. This materialistic view of angels and all the inhabitants of heaven predominates ancient Israelite literature, including the writings of the early followers of Jesus. All right, let's summarize what we've learned. In this whole talk, we've been exploring whether a variety of texts from Genesis to the Jesus movement have the idea of a spirit world or a non-physical realm. We started with looking at the words and ideas associated with heaven. And it turns out that even though it is popular today to think of heaven as a realm beyond time and space, this was not the idea in ancient Israel. Instead, their heaven was a major part of their material world. Most immediately, heaven to them was just the sky, and the sky as they understood it within their ancient cosmology. They didn't know the Earth is a planet orbiting the sun. They didn't know it is a sphere at all. Like most ancient people, so far as they could tell, the Earth was stationary, and all the celestial bodies, like the sun, moon, and stars, orbited the Earth. They understood the sky to be a solid, transparent dome that held back the waters above it, except for when its windows were open. There is also evidence that Israelites believed there to be multiple domes nested within each other. So the dome they saw as the big blue sky was just the first sky, or the first heaven. But if one could travel up through one of its openings, they would eventually reach another dome, or another sky further up from the earth. They understood God's dwelling to be upon the highest dome, the highest heaven. This brings us to our next point. They understood paradise, that is, the dwelling place of God, and other beings near to him, to be palpable. That is, they understood it to be material and tangible. In fact, some texts present the view that it will eventually traverse down through the heavens and settle upon the earth. But they understood that even now it is a material paradise, a botanical utopia, a city with trees and streets of gold. It has buildings and rivers, places to go, people to see. You get the idea. In their descriptions of paradise, there is no kind of immateriality. They overtly describe it as having body, location, structure, and parts. And just as overtly, they describe it undergoing change. It is a time-drenched world just as much as ours is. In fact, in their view, it is just another region of the one material world. Lastly, we looked at what these texts say about the inhabitants of heaven. And, as we saw, they portrayed them as starkly corporeal beings with no hint of immateriality. Some of them are described as being very human-like, while others were depicted as having majestic bodies that combine features from a variety of animals. The hosts of the skies are often pictured as meeting in council together, interacting in real time with each other and with the world down here below. They are themselves corporeal, and their functions and behaviors are likewise corporeal. So in conclusion, there was a clear and well-developed view of the world above in ancient Israel. And this view is yet another manifestation of ancient Israelite materialism. To them, just as human nature was not dualistic, that's including both physical and non-physical, but was instead unitary and purely corporeal, so too was the cosmos itself. It was just one unified corporeal reality. With all the talk of a material cosmos, a palpable paradise, and even the bodily nature of heavenly beings, you might be wondering what they thought about God. Well, that will be the subject of the next talk. It's called God's Gross Anatomy, Transcending Trinitarianism, and it'll be presented by Teresa Wilde. Thank you for joining us.